And because with that, they will see their performance enhanced, recovery periods may be shorter, regeneration faster, just for overall conditioning. It's an excellent tool: fitness, strength, endurance, injury prevention, energy, vitality, and well-being. So that's kind of like the overview and the lead-in to our topic today with our live guests. And the first person I would like to call on is David Olson. And David has been with BEMER since 2015. I met him in Salt Lake City. And so David, when we first met, you had, I know you had heard about BEMER and you were kind of interested. You came to a presentation in Salt Lake, and you also came to the academy that same weekend. And we have really become friends. I call you kind of like a brother of mine. You're a few years younger than I am, but it's been really, really a pleasure to get to know you more. And you do this extreme stuff. I'm always in awe of you when you send me pictures of some activity or another. But I kind of understand it, because in the end you will say, I'm so glad I have this BEMER in my life, and of course, he's obviously also a person. He has a family, he has a son and a grandson, and he loves his animals. And I am so super pleased to be able to introduce you. You're from Pocatello, Idaho, and you're a team manager. And so tell us a little bit about your BEMER experience and all the crazy things that you are doing and why it's helping you so much.
Well, I'm not doing that crazy of things, and we'll learn as we talk to these other athletes tonight.
Well, you do crazier stuff than I do.
You and I met in actually September, October of 2015. Mm-hmm. And Jerry Gallegos was at his first academy. I was there, and Dr. Burka was there, and Nick Hewish. It was a great experience. A friend had called me just a couple weeks earlier, and his parents were going through ultra elderly struggles, similar to what my parents were going through. I had left the ski industry after 20 years, and I'd come back to my hometown to help my parents through their crossroads, and I'd become my father's roommate. And Mom was on the Alzheimer's path, so she was in a facility, and they were doing pretty well. The Alzheimer's is a tough challenge, but she was doing better than so many people. Dad was really healthy in his late 80s. There just wasn't anything easy about being really healthy in your late 80s. I mean, it was still a challenge. And this friend called, asked me if I'd heard about BEMER. His parents were responding really well. There was this class being offered the next weekend in Salt Lake City. I jumped on it. I went there, learned about it. It made so much sense. For my father, and we had the resource to get it into his life. And I witnessed this great experience with a nearly 90-year-old man over the course of 6 weeks. And it just compelled me to really start using it myself. Now, I went into it with really good health. And so it was a really subtle experience. In fact, at the end of that first year, I wasn't convinced, like Casey Conrad loves to say, within a month she was convinced that she'd bought her mother a placebo device. I didn't feel like that, because I knew the science was a third-party, peer-reviewed. It all made sense, but I really wasn't having this great experience yet. It wasn't until the end of that summer in 2016, I did a bike race. It was a big ride for me. It was about 80 miles and 8,000 vertical feet. And I noticed the next day and the day after, often for me, it's 2 days later where the delayed onset muscle soreness happens. I didn't feel like I'd even done that bike ride in terms of muscle soreness. Now, I did have fatigue, but it was incredible to me. And now another year went by, and I was starting to do, I'd been doing endurance events this whole last 30 years of my life. But I noticed when I was finishing with these events that I wasn't experiencing any kind of muscle soreness. Like going up and down stairs, it was like I had not done this huge bicycle ride the day before. And then also, I always thought I was a good sleeper. But I had not remembered my dreams in 20 or 25 years. And I didn't think I needed the sleep program, which we're temporarily not able to promote. But I do have to admit that my depth of sleep changed drastically because of Beamer. And I started dreaming again, and I've been dreaming ever since. So that's been my experience in a kind of a macro sense. I still am doing endurance events, maybe because of some stress management. Things are a little stressful right now in our world, and with Beamer a little bit. And a week ago, the day after Easter, so on Easter Day, I drove to the Lost River Range. It's the range that has most of the highest peaks in Idaho. And I parked there and set up a tent. And the next day, I had designs on one of Idaho's taller peaks. It's 12,078 feet, I think, and then my campsite was at 7,000 feet. So it was going to be a dry land and snow climb. It was super cold. It was 15 degrees when I woke up. I started walking. I had 4 miles to go to the summit and 5,100 feet, and it was a crampon climb. And
with your skis on your back.
Say again.
With your skis on your back.
Yeah, I did have my skis and my boots on my back because I was dry land for a while, so I was in tennis shoes for a couple thousand feet. And even as recently as 3 to 5 years ago, I think I probably would have done it in nearly a couple hours faster, but I am 58, going to be 59 soon, and I can tell when I'm doing these things that I am getting older. The last 2 hours or the last 1,000 feet took me a couple hours. It took me 8 hours round trip. It was 8 miles round trip, and it was a big day. But what just strikes me so crazy after doing something like this is the next day and the following day, I have general fatigue. I mean, I'm tired. I want to nap a lot, but no muscle soreness. And it's extraordinary to me. Especially I was doing something that my body's not that used to, and that's climbing on crampons. And, you kick your toes in and you put those points into the ice, and you do that for a couple hours, and those calves are not used to doing something like that. I mean, I thought for sure sometime in a day or two, I was going to be walking around like a cripple. Really fun to be able to do something like that and feel so good afterwards.
Yeah, I can only attest to that, and because obviously when we get older, we start lagging a little bit more, and but it is really also really amazing. You can do a lot of strenuous stuff. You may feel it in that moment, but the next day it's like as if nothing ever happened, and that continues. I mean, just go down another 4 years, you get to my age, and then you'll see it's nothing has really changed.
Well, it's just the coolest thing in the world to grab another 15 or 20 years is the way it feels.
Yeah.
It feels like I'm in my early 40s and a lot of the time. And what a blessing that is, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but enough of us old folks, David.
Yes.
Let me give you the floor to introduce these two wonderful people that are joining us right now. And so I want you to introduce maybe the first person and tell us a little bit about her. And then we'll introduce the second person. Then they can maybe activate their. Here they are.
Yep.
Yeah, Brittany.
So, yeah, so we'll kind of do this chronologically because Brittany was the first person I met out of this great couple. So, I've been doing Beamer full time now as a distributor since summer of 2016. And as such, I introduced Beamer to everybody I know. And last summer in 2019, actually in the previous spring, and I'm going to tell you his story later, but I had introduced Beamer to a gentleman in Pocatello, Idaho named Luke Nelson. And Luke has the distinction of also being one of the top endurance runners in the world. And I'll share his story later. But Luke had been coming over for a particular issue, having this great response. And Luke has an additional distinction of being a physician's assistant. So he has a couple great backgrounds in being a professional athlete for Patagonia and being a physician's assistant. He had a great experience, and I'm always asking for referrals. And I asked him if there was any athletes that he would love to introduce Bemer to or have me introduce Bemer to. And he mentioned one of his proteges, Brittany Peterson. So it's interesting about Pocatello. We have 3 of these incredible endurance athletes that live there. And so Brittany, when I met her, she was 34. I think she recently turned 35. She is an instructor at Idaho State University in the Occupational Therapy Assistant Program. And, she is one of the top endurance runners in the world too, running for Team Nike. That summer before I met her, she had taken second place in the Western States 100, which is one of the toughest endurance runs in the world, definitely in North America. And she had taken second place for the women in that event. She turned in the 4th fastest time in the 46-year history of the race. And by the time I met her, she had a foot issue going. And so she started coming over for daily sessions. And we'll let her share her story. But, I'd like to ask Brittany, first of all, just for the lay people in the audience, if she would describe this Western States 100 endurance event so that the lay people can understand what it entails.
Yeah. So first of all, thanks for having me on here. So Western States is pretty much just where 100-mile races were discovered, or where it was born, essentially, where Cody should probably be talking more about this because
we'll ask him the history in a while.
Yeah. So basically, it started out as a horse race. Somebody's horse went lame and decided, hey, I'm just going to run it, and then ended up running it. This is a family friend. This someone is a family friend of Cody's. But ended up running it, and that's kind of where this tradition came, because he ran it under 24 hours. So he did 100 miles in less than a day, beat several of the horse riders. And then this tradition of running 100 miles kind of began from there. So at that time, it was a different thing of, we have so many more, nutrition products and gear and different things like that. But Western States has evolved into this really special race of so many spectators, just tons of history, all of these aid stations that are just set up so well. But people, are in the runnings for being at this aid station for years and years and years, because it's such a, just a tradition for these people. So just the history of the race runs through and through, and the atmosphere is unlike any other race really in the US, I think, probably even the world, really.
Can you describe the terrain? I mean, what's a day in the life of a Western States 100 runner like?
So I was fairly lucky in, it was one of the cooler days. But generally, you start in the high country in the Sierras in California, where you're running through snow, you're up at high elevation, more technical terrain. Then you're getting to this canyon section where you're in 110 plus degree heat, which is a traditional day. Again, it was a little cooler for me, which was lucky. And then you have just this super bomber runnable section. So it's got a little bit of everything of, 20,000 feet of climbing. So yeah, like 20,000 feet of climbing over the 100 miles, tons of descending. So you have to have really good running legs. You have to be able to run through snow and rocky terrain. You have to be able to do a ton of climbing, steep climbs, more than I ever really thought for, California, where, being in Idaho, we're playing in the rugged, steep mountains all the time. But there's some pretty good climbing in this race. And then be able to just wear the super intense heat for a long, long time. So that's where things come into play, like blisters, heat issues, stomach issues, all sorts of things that obviously are going to make an impact on how the race goes for you.
And then you had an issue too at the end of it with your competitor, friend, athlete, Claire Gallagher. I mean, tell us about the last like 10, 15 minutes of that race, because I hear it was one of the most intense finishes in the history of the race for women.
Well, it was kind of ironic in a sense. So at mile 80, my coach pulls me aside, at this aid station where we had just found out the gal that was leading the race was pretty much out with an injury. So now Claire was in first, I was in second. So now, he grabbed me by my face and basically said, like, you're chasing down for the win at this point. And so our revised plan at this point was to chase Claire down. And then at mile 94 is a road crossing. So it was a significant point that I knew. And he said, be where you want to be at mile 94, which is, you're pretty tired at that point in a 100-mile race. So it was pretty ironic.
I picture him kind of grabbing you saying, do you understand me?
You're right. Yeah, it all just passed so fast for me. I have no idea. But it was, I ran a really good section. So Cody, this is where in my mind, it's like, oh, I walked so much or whatever, but I guess it was one of the faster women's times of that stretch where I ended up catching Claire, where it was pretty funny because it was just as it was going dark. So we turned off, we didn't have our headlamps on. So we were going incognito and trying to sneak up on her, which we were successful on because we put our lights on, passed her, startled her. But she did Claire's a good friend, where she did a really good job of just hanging on, where we literally crossed that Highway 90 or Highway 49, which was that mile 94. We crossed that side by side. So it was kind of funny where, be where you want to be at mile 94. Whereas like, well, I was right. I was tied for the win. I did everything I could and Claire held on. Where then mile 96 came, and she ended up putting on a huge surge, like something unbelievable, like I've never seen before, which caught me off guard because, again, I'm in this brain fog at the end of a 100-mile race. I'm from Minnesota originally, so one of my friends said, we know catch and release in Minnesota. So I caught her. I didn't know how to execute to go on and take the win, which more so she just had that extra gear that I didn't have. And she put on that surge and put on some time, and then I realized with this final climb that I just didn't have it to go and try to catch her. And she was running so scared that she put on a good amount of time, but just enjoyed that kind of coasting in for that second place, which was a victory in my mind.
For sure. Had Claire ran the race before?
Yes.
Yes. And you had not. This was your first, right?
Yeah. First one for this race. Yeah.
Yes. Right. That's a great story. I love to hear it. And, we applaud you for what you did. I do want to ask you, a couple questions as it relates to BEMER, and you are uniquely qualified to observe and make judgments about BEMER on a couple levels. You have an academic background that gives you the ability to do research and understand it in a way that somebody like I cannot. And so if you could speak to it from that perspective and, why you were looking and seeking me out. Luke had spoken about it because you had this issue in your foot going on. If you could speak to BEMER from that level and what you were experiencing as you started doing rehab with BEMER on my table, and then also speak to BEMER from the perspective of being a professional athlete and what it's doing to you in a performance sense.
Yeah. So I think I have kind of like two viewpoints, the occupational therapy, research-minded viewpoint, and then the crazy runner viewpoint, where when I first, so obviously I trust Luke being a PA, Luke being a fellow pro runner, respected in our community, things like that. It didn't take a whole lot for, it was like, I'm having a problem. Luke was having something semi-similar, not necessarily, but same area anyway. Where at that point I was like, yeah, I'll try it. And if it, what's the worst thing? I'm wasting some of my time, but it's not like it's hurting anything. So started using it from that sense. Meanwhile, kind of talking to different colleagues, looking at some research, where actually one of our mutual friends, Darren, who's my boss, he's a PT, another person that I really highly respect. I had asked him, at school, talked to him about, have you looked at the research? What are your thoughts on this device? Where Darren's recommendation to me was, if I was in your shoes, I would buy one of those. Just being a pro athlete, things like that, where there's so many added benefits. So I had that kind of, that affirmation from somebody outside of the organization, as well as Luke, who had been having success on it. And then, all while using it at David's place, getting my own perspective. So the research speaks volumes, but again, I feel like it's a support to my personal experience, where I feel like that carries a lot more. I mean, not that it carries more weight, but it just complements, like, okay, this research is solid and my personal experience is matching that expectation set by the research. And then here's some pretty credible people in my circle that are having mutual or having similar experiences or sharing good things about this product. So I was open-minded going in, and then paying attention for those changes for me, because I've had several overuse injuries. Just with endurance running, putting in high amounts of volume, I have some different susceptibilities where I've had chronic hip issues, which have led to hamstring issues, which leads to discomfort and inflammation, and then I have an injury. And those aren't necessarily going away with BEMER. However, because I have mechanics and strength and things that I need to work on. However, I would say things that I directly noticed were those symptoms were reduced. So having somewhere where I had an area of inflammation, I could use the BEMER and have immediate relief of discomfort and visible reduction in inflammation in those problem areas for me, which was huge. So that allowed me to continue my physical therapy and different things to work on my true source of my injury while I was managing my symptoms and able to continue on with my training. Mm-hmm. So that's been a huge thing for me, where I think injuries can be inevitable, especially in sports that we kind of beat ourselves up in. We're having this tool to manage those areas or just try to keep inflammation low, and things like that can be super helpful. And then on top of that, I feel like the times that I've been healthy since I've been using BEMER, I could second what you had talked about. Like, I had kind of been coming back from an injury. I had a speed workout that was kind of a test my fitness, test my endurance. So I'd done 2 hard 5K repeats back to back, which generally most of it, that's a long repeat. That's hard to do 2 of them back to back at an up-tempo pace. And I hadn't done speed for like 4 months probably. And so I did those. They went super well. And then I had 0 residual soreness the next day, or even after that workout entirely, which I was telling other people, like, this is unheard of. Like, this is, I hadn't done any bit of up-tempo speed workouts, and to have 0 soreness the next day is the only reason is the BEMER, which is pretty crazy. And then in that same week, I went on to run an 80+ mile week with back-to-backs and higher volume back-to-backs, things like that, where again, I know that the only reason energy level, muscle fatigue, performance-wise, all of those things, the only reason I was able to do that was I knew that I was recovering faster than I ever have because I was using BEMER. So I feel like when I first started it, kind of the light bulb moment for me was, I remember I was running really well. The foot discomfort had resolved essentially. And so I was now being able to see the BEMER effects of cumulative training and recovery and different things like that. And so I had a week that was pretty hard, kind of going into a peak race of mine. Had some back-to-back speed workouts, and I remember just being tired, but I went into that second speed workout the next day, just kind of mentally thinking there's no way I'm going to hit these times that my coach had kind of prescribed, and I surpassed those times, so I felt kind of sluggish to get going. And then once my legs had that demand put on them of going into that speed workout, my body was able to perform even better than I anticipated, despite being fatigued. So I feel like those were kind of the 2 huge eye-opening experiences for me with Beamer as an athlete, and then complemented by just my healthcare brain of, just looking at all of the added benefits, physiologically that I'm getting, and thinking about all of the populations that this can impact, and how I'm doing myself a service of doing this while I'm young, for health benefits as well, while being kind of selfish and having it for sports and athletic benefits as well.
Wow. This is so awesome. Can I just ask you a quick question? Where are you standing here in this picture?
Oh, this is further up the range from where David was talking about just a little bit ago. This is Dickey Peak in the Lost Rivers in Idaho, central Idaho.
Right, just under 12,000 feet, I imagine.
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Yep.
Wow.
Whole picture.
All right. Do you want me to go to the next slide, and you want to introduce Cody?
Yeah, so we'll talk about the business side of Beamer, when we have the two of you together, but this is a great segue into introducing Cody Lind. So Brittany, you're on my table last summer, you're doing Beamer sessions, you're going home to your significant other, Cody, and you're talking about this Beamer, and my understanding is Cody was a little bit skeptical. So you're introducing this to him now for everybody on the call. Cody is a little bit younger than Brittany, so Brittany's kind of at the top end of the millennial age group, and Cody's down at the lower end of the millennial group. He's a full-time athlete and coach. He runs for Scott. He's one of the top endurance runners in the world as well. So Brittany, you're describing Beamer to Cody, and he is being a bit of a skeptic because he didn't get on my table for 2 or 3 months. Is that right?
I think so, yeah.
Cody
has a history of ER doctors in his family.
Yes.
Other critics out there.
So I was definitely, the first thing was, oh yeah, I've heard of this David guy in Pocatello, and he's came from the ski industry, and I heard he just might want to sell you something. I do remember saying that.
The Beamer guy.
And but I noticed that she kept going back day in, day after day, and I knew that something was working and helping her, and I wanted to know more about it. And eventually, I think eventually she gave you, somehow you got a hold of me, and we set up a time, and I went over there and knew that I wanted to try this, mainly because we are constantly in this whole ultra running scene, whether we're doing big mountains or 100-mile races. It's really hard on the human body, and it takes a toll. And I think it's really critical to recover properly from every race, from every workout, and be in tune with your body. And this is definitely a tool that I have now, I truly believe 100% in this because of how recovery was and what I was doing after Brittany had used it. So that's kind of how I was introduced.
Right. So at the time you're getting on my table and beamering, there was a race that was coming up in the fall called the Run the Rut, right?
Yep.
Formerly part of the Sky Runner series of races out of Europe, and these are long endurance runs, long mileage, lots of vertical gain. You'd really not have been planning on doing that, had you?
Right. I actually had come back from Europe after a big race and wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. My training wasn't right where I wanted to be, and then realized, okay, something somewhat close to home and a race that I've wanted to do for some time, and training was coming together really well. And I kind of put myself out there and said, okay, for the 6 weeks going into it, I have a big training block, and every day I can, I'm going over to David's house to Beamer, and I want to use this as a test to see how things will go. And I was just hitting my training perfectly. I was climbing big peaks, putting up a lot of vert, not necessarily a ton of miles, because a lot of this has to do with a lot of hiking and downhills and a lot on the quads.
How much vertical in the Run the Rut in Bozeman, Montana?
Just under 12,000 feet of vertical gain in 31 miles.
Oh, okay. It's a lot.
So I began doing that, and it ended up really well. I ended up going into that race feeling feeling really comfortable and very prepared, and ended up winning the race, which was just incredible. And I knew if everything came together, I could do that, but I just had an amazing day. And then kind of on top of that, I knew that as soon as I could, I want to get back to Pocatello to use this as a recovery tool. And so for the next 2 weeks after that, really used every time, twice a day, I was coming over a few times just so I could see how my recovery was. And that led into me believing, okay, when can we get a BEMER into our life?
Right. And I want to go back to that, but I do want you to just describe. So in February, you went down to Costa Rica for the Coastal Challenge. My understanding, it was like 144 miles and 32,000 vertical feet. And this was a stage race, so it wasn't all continuous. You'd run a certain amount of time over the course of 6 days, and then camp in place, and then start out the next day. And whoever did it most quickly in that time wins, right?
That is correct, yeah.
And I was following you through that, and you were in second and third place for a portion of it. And then I guess the most technical, difficult part is the end. And I mean, that's where you excel with your background in Idaho's mountains. And tell us about that too.
Yeah, so once again, this was a 144-mile race over the course of 6 days. So it was 20 to 30 miles a day, basically. And the goal between there is, so when you're in the front, and all my respect goes towards the mid to the back of the pack people, because they're out there twice the time, out there all day. They finish at night, have dinner, do it the next morning. Where I have this advantage, okay, I have this short period of time from 5 to 6 in the morning, and I finish by 10, 11 a.m. Then you have this huge time in the afternoon of recovery. And so it was all about eating right, getting sleep, and what you're doing in that amount of time to be prepared for the next day. And I think I was able to manage that really well, not necessarily sit in a tent and just wait for the whole day, because I was going in the ocean and being a tourist as well, enjoying my whole time in Costa Rica, which was phenomenal.
Because Brittany was following you. She was with
Brittany
you.
was able to go, and it was just amazing support and crew to have her and see a familiar face along.
So this is so funny. Please share with us how you trained those several weeks at Reed Gym going into this incredibly high humidity, hot race. It was so funny to witness this, everyone.
Yeah, I did get to run into David at the gym, but I would go to the sauna, sit in the sauna for 30 minutes, maybe do some push-ups or some type of core. It's a pretty small room, so if it was packed, I wasn't able to do anything, and I would just sit there. And then I would go upstairs, because there was a treadmill upstairs above the sauna, and I'd try to get there as fast as I could, and a down 2 shirts and a down jacket, and run for 30 to 45 minutes and just be really hot, and then go straight back to the sauna for another 30-minute session, trying to get 90 minutes in for training each day.
And you feel it really was an advantage when you got to Costa Rica with huge high humidity and high temperatures, right?
Yeah, I really do. I think that helped tremendously, and being able to, you're constantly drinking, you have to stay hydrated, and practicing in the sauna and at the gym, hydrating helped.
Because this was the debate going into it, because to take the BEMER to a third world country where you're camping out, and it would have been so great to have it, but then the risk of taking it to a third world country, and I kind of encourage you guys not to, and you did.
So close, yeah.
Everything was wet and sandy and just
it was the
a
best
disaster.
decision not
so
to,
it was really smart to not bring.
So let's go back to November, December. I mean, as you guys start going into the holidays, I've been talking to you about the business side of BEMER as well, and how it could make sense for a couple such as yourselves, given your backgrounds and your futures and where you want to go. I mean, Cody, you're a full-time coach as well, and Brittany's coaching with you, and then she has a full-time academic career as an instructor, and yet, I mean, the goal is to be professional athletes as much as possible, as much as your budget allows. And Nike and Scott aren't paying for everything. And so, as we talked about the business, what made sense about the business for you guys?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that we love traveling, and we're constantly traveling. and talking, and between coaching and other fellow athletes or competitors, we're constantly talking with people, and it's like, well, this makes sense. We're a huge believer in it. We want this. We finally brought one into our lives come mid-December, and right in that time frame became distributor and said, okay, we're going all in. And I think this is just a perfect way to mesh with our running life. And then it was the next question of, let's go all in and get to the academy was our next question. And I'll let Britt, if she wanted to add anything to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think Cody and I have discussed a long time about, full-time coaching, kind of the entrepreneurial lifestyle, where he's on that path at this point, and I'm thinking about future potential access to that path. But for him, it just really made sense at this point of an adjunct, because he has, that connection to different athletes. And then on top of that, we both have connection in, the whole grand scheme of people, not people that we're coaching necessarily, but just so connected and, to different athletes throughout the world, where we just have that avenue of being able to share this and being able to educate people. And then I think from me, where that's kind of Cody's adjunct, even though I work with him on the distributor aspect of Beamer, but I kind of bring the different spin of, I'm thinking back, I worked in the hospital for 7 or 8 years, where I think back to all of my and I just think of all of those people that personally in my or in my life, healthcare provider, you're constantly thinking about how can someone get better, how can someone have that quality of life back. So it's like between both avenues of athletics and the people that we reach in that platform, and then I still have so many good friends that are practicing and just that healthcare mindset, I feel like it was the perfect adjunct to bring this part into our career and just see where it goes from there.
So you guys ended up getting yourselves a Beamer for Christmas.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, we did.
Congratulations.
And I have to say, like Cody, you kind of talked about how he was skeptical at first, and like Cody is not very quick to make big purchases. So, that speaks huge volumes. And I think that's something we've shared, because the younger audience, it's not like we had that money just laying around, but we were able to prioritize saving. We were able to prioritize how can we make this, because we valued it and found it important. And that's where, I think, the price tag could be a huge barrier for people, but leave that, I feel like we're walking testimonies of, if it's important and if that person values it, they can find a way. And it wasn't a point of, again, we're young people where it's like, this is going to pay for itself over and over and over, from performance perspectives as well as overall health benefits.
So what do you think about the Beamer Go set then, as it relates to your generation, your demographic? Tell us about that. What are your feelings?
Yeah, so I'm definitely excited for that, because it's definitely, I feel like in my generation, a lot of people want something pretty simple and they can see it, and you can put it on a certain area. It's pretty localized and it'll be easy to use, and it's simple. And you can put it in, if they purchase the backpack, you can have the backpack, have it all in there. And I think it'll be a good thing. And especially for a lot of the people we are around, they travel, and people are constantly traveling, whether it's around the nation or around the world or different events and racing. It's a huge, huge thing, because it's easy access for everyone, and will help, I think.
Yeah, and I think too, like for me, when I've had problem areas or I have an area of specific discomfort, and I can use, the Beamer kind of as that spot treatment, like that's pretty powerful for people of, versus laying on the mat for 8 minutes, and we know the systemic benefits and things like that, but you don't feel different. You don't have a noticeable like aha moment. I think the way the Go is set up, it kind of speaks to those people that have those problem areas or have a specific need for it, where I think that's where athletics comes in, or, specific conditions and things like that. But I think there is a little bit more visible change when you're using it in the spot treatment kind of fashion that might reach more people at a quicker level potentially, because you're not having, like David's experience of, using it for a year because you're pretty healthy, and then being able to kind of have some insight looking back on, oh, these were probably some of the changes that I never realized. But someone could potentially have, I put this on my elbow that hurts and my elbow feels better. Now I can go play tennis again or whatever. I feel like it speaks to that a little bit easier.
Right. Back to your
question for
Yes,
Cody, because I asked Brittany, where were you in that picture?
That picture was in the Highlands of Scotland.
Oh, wow.
Yes.
Another dream of mine to go there.
Oh, so amazing.
So
I believe it.
I have to share with you, with the audience, I mean, some of the things that these young people are doing, putting together a bunch of peaks in one continuous day is something that's really popular. So in Idaho, we have 12,000 foot peaks, and most of them are in that Lost River Range. 7 of them are. And so Luke Nelson, who is kind of a mentor to these two, and he's the physician's assistant. He is sponsored by Patagonia. And if you guys want to read a really cool article, you can get online, and it's called The Obvious Line. If you look up Patagonia and The Obvious Line, it's an article about Luke Nelson doing the Wasatch Crest in Utah, and that's stringing all the big peaks together in that one ridge line in the Wasatch, and he had the fastest known time. He had the fastest known time in Idaho, doing the 12,000 footers, and I think it was like 28 hours. But then Cody comes along, who's like 16 years younger, and I mean, everybody was blown away that Luke Nelson did these 12,000 footers in 28 hours, and Cody comes along and crushes the fastest known time in like 20 hours and several minutes. It's just extraordinary what they're doing in these crazy high altitude events. And I know Brittany's done this same ridge walk with Cody, and she's strung these 7 peaks together in one day. It's a crazy feat.
I have a question for both of you. Because of high altitudes, a lot of people feel that immediate impact because, oxygen levels are just not as prevalent and thick there. And obviously you can train for that gradually. But with the use of the BEMER, do you feel like you have a much easier time adjusting to altitudes?
I definitely do. And this is something, if we have someone who's a perfect example, Luke, he just did something with this, and we'll have to get him on it to talk to you about that exact thing, and I have, from other people and as a coach, I have seen that. And as myself, I'm feeling that, especially at these higher altitudes. And I have not had it long enough where now's the time, from now till July is when I start getting into my high altitude. So I'm really curious to see and kind of experiment with that as well.
So
I definitely feel like it does.
We'll have to invite you back to tell us about your experience.
Can you describe, Cody, as best you can, what Luke did in, I think, January in the Himalayas?
Put the actual route, or kind of like
just in general terms, what he accomplished over there?
Yeah, so he trained and put together. Basically, there was about a 12-week program where he was living in a high altitude tent, training, preparing to go to the Himalayas, and
in Pocatello at 4,300 feet.
And in conjunction with the high altitude tent, he was using BEMER twice a day, 8 minutes a day. And then he went to Himalayas and did a project that he kind of had like 3 or 4 different expeditions, but he summited a peak that was over 22,000 feet, I think, somewhere around that range. And I definitely know there were about 4 or 5 people in the whole party, and he was the strongest by far. And a lot of that, he said, had to do with his training and preparation, not necessarily how much in shape, but the preparation of just living every day at high altitude, as well as BEMER going into that. So that's kind of my rough.
That's cool.
Because in January, Luke, who had turned Brittany onto my BEMER, turned around and became Cody and Brittany's first distributor and first customer.
Yep.
Wow. Well, you guys are awesome. I just love also when the younger generation comes into our sphere of influence. And I thank David very much for, because it probably has also something to do because he's so incredibly active for an old guy.
Older.
But I always love it when the younger generation kind of discovers BEMER and can help other people open up their eyes to self-care and self-empowerment. Whether you want to be like as actively and strenuous as you guys do it, or just be on the top level of performance as much as you want to be. That's really the key, and nothing is more important right now than our health, the times that we're going through. That really becomes so clear. So I want to thank you for embracing it. And let's see if we have some questions for you guys. Nora, would you chime in and let us know what you've been watching there in the chat room?
Sure. Well, Brittany and Cody, thanks so much for coming on tonight. You guys were really awesome, and it was a pleasure to listen to you guys speak about your athletic experience and also how BEMER now fits into that whole picture. So there have been a couple of questions about usage. So people are curious, even though that they know there are no additional protocols in addition to the basic plan, but how have you guys used the BEMER, pre and post training and pre and post actual, competitions and races?
So I've played around. So I'm the therapist. So of course I do as I want and not as I say. So I played around with should I put everything at intensity 10 and do a 20-minute session at intensity 10? In conjunction with, I hear lower intensity is good for inflammation. So we played around a little bit with that of progressing from minimal intensity all the way up to 10 over a period of time, and using that to kind of ramp up our systems, as well as high intensity seems to be doing pretty well for recovery or post-workout. Or did I have that backwards? No, I had that backwards. So having it high intensity to kind of charge the system, and then having the ramping to kind of bring that system back down for recovery. That seems to be working, but then I still use program 1 for those kind of problem areas or areas of inflammation or discomfort and things like that. And I find that to be really effective. So I try to keep a good balance of not thinking more is better, because obviously that's not true, but also playing around with that and seeing how can you use that kind of action-packed 8 to 20 minutes to just prime your system and get it ready for a workout.
Yeah, and in all honesty, the best thing I've done is stick to the normal plan, and I actually go 1 through 6, and 1 for 1 week, 2 for 1 week, and everything says go back to 3, and then you always do 3 through 6. And I've always just, I guess now that we've had it, we're on our 4th cycle. I'm on this week, I think I'm on week 4. But I have found my sweet spot twice a day, kind of the 3 to 5 range, 3, 4, 5s. That's worked really well as far as recovery and sleeping and just the performance aspect as well.
Awesome.
So then you are doing the basic plan, and then in addition to prep for workout or training, you do higher settings. Sometimes you have set your own programs on higher intensities for a little longer period of time. And but when you come back, so that goes in addition to your basic plan, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have to understand a light day for these guys is like 15 to 20 miles.
Wow.
You know, they are actually doing what the human body is meant to do. Yeah.
So
Okay, Laura,
there
back
was
to you.
there was another question. If Brittany, you use this person didn't catch it. If you did use the Beamer before the 100 Ultra race.
I did not. I started using it, I think, like the month afterward. So I was already kind of out of that, feeling pretty recovered from the 100-mile, which I wish I had, because it would have been so curious to know. I mean, I remember I was dragging for weeks and weeks where I felt like I could just fall asleep at my table, where it would have been really cool. And so now I guess I have that baseline experience of here's how my recovery was for a 100-miler. And then the next time I do one, to have hopefully a different experience with recovery. But no, I didn't use it before that.
All right, and people are also curious if you two use the sleep program.
Yes, and we will be completely honest and say we need to use it even more. Or I guess my answer should be we need to get another B body so we can have two. But yes, we alternate and definitely love the sleep mode, sleep system.
And I think, we're kind of similar, maybe in that early phase, like David, of we sleep pretty well. But I will say, and Cody can speak to this too, how I need a lot of sleep. That seems to be my thing, is I need to sleep a lot. And I'm not that like super zealous 5 a.m. go run. I'm the sleep until 9 and drag me out of bed. And so I was very curious to see what the Beamer sleep program, and this is where I we have to move it. And that's where we have not gotten into the greatest consistent routine with doing that. And I know I should, because when I use the sleep program, obviously my sleep quality is better, but I don't wake up with that like hangover feeling. I don't wake up with that fog that I'm fighting to get to caffeine to kind of get out of that fog to then start my day. Where when I was using the sleep program more consistently, I would wake up before my alarm, which for me is kind of a big deal, where it's clearly this is doing something for just the caliber of my sleep, where it's like my body doesn't feel great when I get 10 and a half hours of sleep, because that's probably not exactly healthy, though I'm very active. So maybe I need that, so it's that struggle. But it's very curious, when I use the sleep program, I seem to not need the 10 and a half hours, and I get up naturally before that, and feel a lot better and more refreshed and can get going. So there's definitely some changes. And then similar to David, where, I dream way more now, since we've been using the Beamer.
Wow. Well, I can definitely relate to that, the morning alertness. I had the same experience when I started using the sleep program. And thanks for being honest. I would have pinned you as a get up at 5 a.m. type of person. now I don't feel so bad. Another person was asking, is Brittany planning on running the Western states this summer?
I was. Unfortunately, it was canceled, which was the right decision. So I'm deferred to 2021. So I'm deferred, not this summer, but the following summer I'll be heading back.
All right.
So I have a question. I guess it may be after the 2021 Western States 100 that you introduced Beamer to your competitor.
Well, it's funny, because Claire, the gal that won Western States, she runs for Patagonia, so she's good friends with Luke.
She's going to be surrounded by him.
So Luke brought her to the local race that Luke puts on here in Pocatello last summer, where Claire just ran the short race and broke my course record. And then a month later, she beats me barely at Western States. So Claire and I have this little fun camaraderie going, where it is hurting me a little bit to introduce Beamer to her. But no, I'm just kidding.
Right. Funny. Any other questions, Nora?
No, but just a lot of, congratulations, and people really enjoyed hearing from you, and congratulations to your success, and that you have a lot to look forward to, both in your athletics and your OT career and the business side of things. So lots of well wishes, and very inspiring. People feel very inspired from hearing you guys. And somebody did ask, you know, is the Beamer Go going to have the sleep program? Well, the sleep program is not compatible with the local applicators. So once we do get the full B body cleared as a class 2, then, you know, then you could purchase that as an additional applicator to then use the sleep program.
And I think a misunderstanding is that the B box is different. It's the exact same B box. It will come with sleep mode. It will come with the red light therapy. So those 2 icons are still on the box. They're just not relevant until the B body gets cleared and the B light gets cleared. And once that happens, we can buy those as accessories, and that B box that you own from the Go set will run those 2 applicators just like it always has.
Okay,
Wow.
thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks, David. And so more well wishes to you. And yes, somebody pointed out backpack is accidentally misspelled there. We apologize for that. But everybody knows how backpack is spelled. So I'll turn it over to David and Bettina. You guys can close it off with.
And that wasn't me, backpack.
and thanks again, you guys, so much. That was a real pleasure to hear from you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Brittany and Cody.
Yeah, so you guys, like, I really want to thank you for coming on and spending this hour with us, and want to thank David for making that possible.